Cold needles pierced every cell of his body. General Marcus Aurelius had experienced revival from cryosleep 17 times during the Centauri campaigns. But familiarity did nothing to dull the sensation of flesh remembering how to live. His lungs seized as artificial oxygen flowed through them. Neural pathways sparked back to consciousness, sending confused signals about temperature, pressure, and orientation. Through the haze of revival, he noted differences in the standard procedure, subtle variations in timing and technique that spoke of alien technology. Neural pattern stabilizing, an unfamiliar voice spoke somewhere beyond his field of vision. Consciousness returning to baseline human parameters, cellular reconstruction proceeding within acceptable margins. The revival chamber itself looked wrong, gone with the utilitarian angels and sterile white surfaces of human medical technology. Instead, organic curves flowed like liquid metal, creating patterns his eyes struggled to interpret. 3 tall figures stood over him, their elongated bodies draped in iridescent robes that shifted color with each movement. Medical displays pulsed with alien script that somehow translated itself into his mind, another sign that this awakening was different from all others. The neural interface felt smoother, more integrated than human technology had ever achieved. The central figure stepped forward, its silver skin catching and refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. General Aurelius, I am Dr. Selmy. We apologize for waking you, but our need is desperate. Aurelius attempted to sit up, fighting against muscles that had forgotten their purpose. You're not human. No. Selmy's large eyes blinked vertically, revealing secondary membranes that filtered light in ways human eyes never could. We are Noranites. You have slept for 312 years. The implications struck through the lingering fog of revival. Aurelius drew a sharp breath. Earth? Gone. Selmy's voice carried genuine sadness, harmonics in her alien vocal structures conveying emotion with surprising clarity. The human worlds fell long ago. You are one of the few preserved. Why wake me now? Aurelius asked, decades of military discipline keeping his voice steady, even as his mind raced through the implications. A shorter Noranite approached, wearing what was clearly a military uniform despite its alien design. The fabric seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an effect that drew attention without demanding it, exactly what a command uniform should do. I am Commander Calith. The new arrival's tone carried authority tempered with urgency. Our civilization faces extinction at the hands of the Bokfa Empire. They based their strategies on recovered human military texts. Specifically, your text, General, Selmy added, bringing up holographic displays of tactical data. Your published works from the Centauri campaigns formed the foundation of their approach. The displays showed battle formations Aurelius recognized instantly, deployments he had developed during humanity's expansion into the stars. But something about their execution seemed off, mechanical, in a way his original strategies had never been. And you want my help to counter these strategies, Aurelius tested his legs, finding them steadier with each passing moment. We want you to teach us, Calith spoke, though his tone carried barely concealed skepticism. Though I failed to see how primitive human methods could improve upon our technological advantages. Commander, Selmy's head tilted in what Aurelius was beginning to recognize as their equivalent of a frown. The Bokfa's technology level matches our own. Their advantage lies in superior tactical implementation. Aurelius studied the tactical displays more carefully now. The formations were perfect, too perfect, lacking the subtle variations that actual combat required. Take me to your military academy. The academy grounds spread beneath a violet sky where twin suns cast competing shadows across crystalline buildings that seemed to grow from the ground itself. Young Noranite cadets moved through combat simulations with precise, measured steps that spoke of extensive drilling. These simulated engagements, Aurelius spoke, studying the patterns of movement. They're based on intercepted Bokfa tactics. Correct. Calith straightened with pride, gesturing toward the advanced simulation technology surrounding them. Our training systems are the finest in known space. Aurelius watched another squad fall to the simulated enemy, their movements technically perfect but fundamentally flawed. I see the problem. They're learning to fight like computers, not soldiers. From what you've told me about the Bokfa, They appear to be making the same mistake, following tactical doctrine without understanding its underlying principles. Bring them to the briefing hall, Aurelius spoke to Calith. All of them. Let's see if we can correct that. The briefing hall's architecture mirrored the organic flow of Nornite design, with rising tiers that seemed to float unsupported. Hundreds of young Nornites filled the seats, their silver skin creating an ethereal effect as they shifted position. The gentle hum of environmental systems carried through the chamber, punctuated by the subtle sounds of hundreds of beings breathing in unnatural unison. Aurelius stood before them, conscious of being perhaps the last human they would ever see. Of being the last human anyone would ever see, himself included. His worn military uniform contrasted sharply with their flowing garments, a physical reminder of the gulf between their civilizations. Your enemy believes they understand warfare because they've memorized tactical doctrine, he addressed the assembled cadets, his voice carrying easily in the acoustically perfect space. I intend to show you why that belief will be their undoing. Movement caught his attention, one cadet leaning forward with unusual intensity, breaking the almost mechanical uniformity of her peers. Aurelius gestured towards her. Your name, cadet? Vendra, General. She spoke with calm determination that set her apart from the carefully modulated tones of her classmates. Third cycle tactical student. Tell me, Vendra, Aurelius seized on that spark of individuality. Why do you fight? To defend our people, she answered without hesitation, the words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. That? Aurelius nodded approvingly, noting how other cadets stirred at her response. Already set you apart from what I've learned at the Bokfa. They fight because their tactical computers tell them to. He turned to address the entire hall, watching carefully for reactions. When I'm done with your training, you'll understand the difference between knowing tactics and understanding warfare. And that difference will determine the survival of your civilization. The words hung in the air as the twin suns cast their light through crystal windows, creating patterns that seemed to emphasize the gravity of the moment. In the silence that followed, Aurelius could almost feel the first cracks appearing in the rigid thinking that had brought these people to the brink of extinction. A week into training, Aurelius watched his students struggle through the first live fire exercise. The practice field stretched out under the twin suns, dotted with obstacles and defensive positions. Environmental controls maintained a constant temperature, but waves of heat distorted the air above the energy barriers, marking engagement zones. Combat drones circled overhead, recording every moment for later analysis. Their quiet hum provided a constant backdrop to the sounds of simulated combat below. Combat doctrine states we should establish firing positions here and here. Vendra indicated points on her tactical display, the holographic terrain map casting blue light across her silver features, following the distributed defense pattern from your Epsilon campaign. Aurelius studied the terrain, noting how the natural formations created channels of movement his original doctrine never considered. And what does your instinct tell you? That something feels wrong about this setup, she admitted, mandible plates shifting and what he'd learned indicated frustration. But I can't identify why. Continue the exercise, he instructed, watching how her posture tensed at the command. Sometimes we learn more from failure than success. The simulation began. Vendra's squad took up their textbook positions, facing off against another cadet team playing the role of Bokfa forces. Within minutes, their defensive line began to crumble. The precision of their movements only emphasized the fundamental flaws in their approach. Commander Calith approached from the observation post, his uniform rippling with sensor data. They're following your documented strategies perfectly. Why are they failing? Aurelius remained silent, watching the exercise unfold. With each passing moment, his expression grew more troubled as patterns emerged that 3 centuries of cryosleep had given him the perspective to finally recognize. End simulation, he called out suddenly, his voice cutting through the artificial sounds of combat. Everyone, gather here. The cadets assembled, their silver skin dulled with exertion. Environmental systems worked to dissipate the excess heat their bodies had generated during the exercise. Vendra's squad showed clear frustration at their defeat, their normally perfect posture showing subtle signs of strain. I owe you all an apology, Aurelius spoke, his voice grave as decades of military experience shifted into a new perspective. I've just discovered a critical flaw in my own tactical doctrine, one I never recognized during the Centauri campaigns. Dr. Selmy, observing from nearby, moved closer, her scientific curiosity evident in the rapid movements of her secondary eyelids. "What do you mean, General?" "These defensive formations," Aurelius gestured to the tactical display, expanding key sections of the battlefield diagram. "They're optimized for human reaction times and sensory capabilities. The patterns assume specific biological limitations that neither your people nor the Bakfa share." He turned to Vendra, whose earlier frustration had transformed into intense focus. "You said something felt wrong. That's because your superior spatial awareness and faster neural processing make these formations actively handicap your natural advantages. But the Bakfa use these tactics successfully," Kaleth protested, though his tone carried more curiosity than skepticism now. "No," Aurelius adjusted the tactical display, highlighting movement patterns that suddenly seemed obviously flawed. "They use them effectively against other forces using the same flawed doctrine. It's a circular problem. Everyone is copying a strategy that's fundamentally unsuited for non-human combat." Vendra's eyes widened with understanding, her multiple pupils focusing and refocusing as she processed the implications. "That's why our technological advantages never seem to help. We're fighting in a box built for different beings." "Exactly." Aurelius began adjusting the tactical display, creating new patterns that accounted for Nor-Knight capabilities. The Bakfa's rigid adherence to these patterns means they're operating far below their actual capabilities. But because everyone else copies the same doctrine, no one has realized the mistake. He highlighted new positions across the terrain map, the holographic indicators shifting to account for multiple angles of awareness. "Your species can process visual information from multiple directions simultaneously. These formations waste that ability by focusing on human-style linear firing lines." "Show me," Kaleth demanded, his earlier skepticism transformed into intense interest. Aurelius turned to the assembled cadets, noting how their postures had shifted from rigid attention to adaptive readiness. "Reform your squads. This time, ignore everything you've read about human tactical doctrine. Instead, we're going to build a completely new approach based on Nor-Knight capabilities." The second exercise began. This time, Vendra's squad spread out in patterns that would have been impossible for human soldiers to coordinate. Their multiple pupiled eyes tracked threats from all directions, their faster neural responses allowing split-second position changes that turned their defensive line into a fluid, adaptive web. Combat drones recorded massive shifts in performance metrics, their sensors struggling to track the complex interactions between squad members. The simulated Bakfa forces, still operating on human tactical algorithms, failed to adapt to the new patterns. "Their combat effectiveness has increased by 40%, Selma reported, checking the simulation metrics that scrolled across her datapad. "And they're only beginning to experiment with these new formations." Aurelius nodded, watching patterns emerge that he'd never imagined during his active service. "And we're just beginning to scratch the surface. Everything I brought with me needs to be reevaluated from this new perspective." The Bakfa, Vendra approached, her breathing already returned to normal thanks to superior Nor-Knight biology. "They've built their entire military doctrine on these flawed patterns?" "Yes." A slight smile crossed Aurelius's face as he watched other squads beginning to innovate on their own, and they're too committed to their rigid interpretation of human tactics to recognize the mistake. "That's how we're going to beat them." He addressed the entire group, watching how they naturally arranged themselves in formations that would have been chaos to human eyes, but made perfect sense for their physiology. "Forget everything you know about human warfare. We're going to build something entirely new. Tactics that play to your natural strengths instead of forcing you to fight like humans." Commander Kaleth studied the performance data streaming across multiple displays. "How long have you known about this flaw?" "I realized it watching Vendra's first exercise," Aurelius admitted, observing another squad testing the limits of their natural capabilities. 3 centuries in cryosleep, and learning that humanity died out gave me perspective. Sometimes you have to step back from your own doctrine to see its limitations." The twin suns cast long shadows across the practice field as planning began for the next day's training. For the first time since awakening, Aurelius felt true hope. The Bakfa had copied his tactics perfectly, and that would prove to be their greatest weakness. The command center's holographic display showed another successful engagement. Cadet squadrons, now implementing modified tactics, consistently outperformed the simulated Bakfa forces. Environmental systems hummed as they processed the excess heat generated by the massive computational arrays tracking hundreds of simultaneous combat variables. First Speaker Telera, leader of the Nornite Council, observed from the command platform. Her ceremonial robes caught and refracted light in patterns that subtly emphasized her authority. Your training methods have produced remarkable results, General. The cadets deserve the credit. Aurelius adjusted the replay sequence, noting how each squad had begun developing its own variations on the basic principles. They're the ones creating the tactics. Each squad contributes refinements based on their practical experience. Vendra entered with her tactical team, their silver skin gleaming from recent exercise. The physical signs of exertion had already faded, another sign of their species' superior recovery rate. General, we've completed the urban warfare trials. Show me. Aurelius activated a secondary display, expanding the tactical replay to fill a significant portion of the command center's airspace. The simulation replays demonstrated Nornite forces moving through cityscape settings in complex, three-dimensional patterns. Squads flowed through vertical spaces like Mercury, their natural ability to process multiple viewpoints simultaneously, allowing them to maintain awareness in ways human soldiers never could. The simulated Bokfa forces, still bound by human-style tactical limitations, failed to track their movements effectively. They're using the vertical space instinctively now, Commander Kaleth noted, his earlier skepticism completely transformed into professional appreciation, no more forcing themselves in the ground-based formations. Dr. Selmy analyzed the performance data scrolling across her neural interface. Neural response times are approaching theoretical maximums. They're finally fighting as Nornites rather than imitating humans. The ambient lighting shifted as First Speaker Telera activated a strategic display, casting the command center in shades of red. We've received new intelligence. The Bokfa have begun their final approach to our outer systems. Commander Rex Shar leads their fleet personally. Aurelius studied the Bokfa fleet formations. Their tactical patterns were hauntingly familiar, exact reproductions of movements he developed during the Gibraltar offensive. They're following standard human void space doctrine to the letter. No deviation, no adaptation. Their success rate with these tactics had been nearly perfect against other species, Kaleth pointed out, though his tone suggested he now understood why. Because everyone else tries to counter with the same doctrine, Aurelius highlighted specific patterns in the Bokfa approach, their movements now seemingly oddly constrained. Look here and here. They're creating elaborate solutions to problems that don't exist for your species. Vendra moved closer to the display, her multiple pupils focused on different aspects of the tactical projection simultaneously. Their entire formation assumes they're fighting forces with human equivalent reaction times and sensory limitations. Precisely, Aurelius expanded the tactical overlay, revealing layers of unnecessary complexity in the Bokfa approach. They've spent so long perfecting these patterns that they've lost the ability to adapt when they don't work. How long until they reach our defensive perimeter? Telera asked, her robe shifting color to match the tactical displays. 36 hours at current speeds. Kaleth checked the sensor data streaming across his neural interface. Aurelius turned to Vendra, noting how she already begun analyzing potential counterformations. Gather the squadron leaders. It's time to move from exercises to actual combat planning. The briefing room filled with Nornite officers, their attention fixed on tactical displays that transform the air into a three-dimensional map of the coming battlefield. Each officer's neural interface is synchronized with the main system, creating a shared tactical awareness that would have been impossible for human commanders. The Bokfa expect us to respond according to standard counter-tactics. Aurelius activated a simulation of the approaching fleet, watching how the officers' postures shifted as they processed the data. We're going to show them what happens when those expectations fail. They'll attempt to adjust their approach, one squadron leader suggested, though her tone indicated she now understood why such adjustments would come too late. They'll try, Aurelius agreed, watching his students naturally organize themselves in ways that would have been impossible for human commanders. But their entire command structure is built around executing human doctrine perfectly. They've optimized themselves for exactly one way of fighting, and we're about to make that way obsolete. The room erupted in tactical discussions as squadron leaders began coordinating their roles in the defense. Neural interfaces sparked with shared data as officers developed complementary strategies that took advantage of their species' unique capabilities. There's still one problem. Vendra approached the main display, highlighting specific weapon configurations in the Bokfa fleet. Their ships have superior firepower, Even with better tactics, we're outgunned. That's why we're not going to fight them with strength against strength. Aurelius brought up detailed scans of the Bokfa fleet, noting weak points that only became apparent when viewed from multiple angles simultaneously. Their formations are designed to counterattack from specific vectors, the ones that made sense against human forces. Your superior spatial coordination lets you attack from angles they never had to defend. Commander Kalith studied the approach patterns, his neural interface processing multiple scenarios simultaneously. They'll be expecting us to engage at standard combat ranges, which is exactly what we won't do, Aurelius smiled grimly, highlighting gaps on the Bokfa defensive screens that only became apparent when viewed through Nor Knight's sensory capabilities. Your pilots can handle maneuvers that would kill a human crew. We're going to turn their own defensive doctrine into a trap. First Speaker Tellera observed the planning with growing confidence, the color patterns in her robe stabilizing in decisive hues. When can the fleet begin deployment? The squadron leaders need 6 hours to coordinate the new attack patterns. Aurelius checked the tactical timeline, watching the pieces fall into place. After that, we'll need every moment for practice runs. They've never faced an enemy that truly understood their tactics, Vendra realized, her eyes tracking multiple simulation outcomes at once, much less prepared to exploit fundamental weaknesses they never even knew about. Exactly. Aurelius watched his students continue their planning, their natural abilities finally unleashed to their full potential. They learned to fight like humans. We're teaching you how to fight like Nor Knights. That's a lesson they won't survive. The Nor Knight defense fleet hung in the darkness of space, arranged in formations that would have appeared chaotic to human eyes. Each ship maintained positions in a complex, multi-dimensional web that utilized their species' natural spatial awareness. The void between vessels pulsed with encrypted communications as neural networks synchronized combat data across the fleet. Bokfa fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel, a sensor operator announced, her neural interface processing multiple sensor feeds simultaneously, 30 million kilometers and closing. Aurelius stood on the command deck of the flagship, surrounded by his former students now serving as squadron commanders. The tactical display showed the approaching enemy fleet, a precise arrow formation straight from his old military texts, rendered in perfect detail by advanced sensor arrays. Commander Kalith monitored the enemy approach from his neural interface station, streams of tactical data reflecting off his silver skin. They're deploying exactly as predicted, spreading into textbook assault positions. Because that's all they know how to do, Vendra observed from her tactical station. Her eyes tracked multiple threat vectors simultaneously. Look at all their screening elements, still compensating for human reaction time limitations. A signal chimed through the command deck, neural interfaces automatically adjusting to accommodate the new data stream. First Speaker Tellera's image appeared on the main screen, her robes shifting through the formal diplomatic patterns. General, Commander Rexshar is broadcasting. The Bokfa commander appeared, a massive, chitinous figure with compound eyes and ceremonial scarring across its armored carapace. Battle computers processed the alien's subtle movements, searching for tactical significance in every gesture. Nor Knight forces, your defense formation is inefficient. Rexshar's translated voice carried tones of genuine confusion. Surrender now to minimize casualties. They really don't understand, Kalith spoke quietly, neural feeds capturing the irony in his voice patterns. They see our formation and think we're making mistakes. Aurelius stepped forward, decades of command experience evident in his bearing. Commander Rexshar, I am General Marcus Aurelius. The Bokfa's commander's posture shifted subtly, combat sensors detecting increased activity in its neural clusters. The author of our tactical doctrine. You should recognize the futility of resistance. We have perfected your methods. You've perfected their execution, Aurelius agreed, watching multiple tactical displays track the enemy's continuing deployment. But you never understood their purpose. That's why you're about to lose your fleet. He cut the transmission before Rexshar could respond. The Bokfa fleet continued its approach, spreading into an attack formation that would have been devastating against human forces. The void between ships crackled with energy as weapon systems powered up, following protocols written centuries ago. All squadrons, prepare for combat. Aurelius broadcast to the fleet, his voice carrying through neural networks to every crew member. Remember your training. Don't let them dictate the engagement range. The Bokfa fleet opened fire at precisely the distance specified in human combat doctrine. Their synchronized broadsides cut through enemy space, as the Nornite vessels moved in ways their targeting systems couldn't predict. Energy weapons designed to track human speed evasions found themselves firing at empty void while their targets operated on entirely different vectors. Multiple vectors of approach confirmed, Vendra reported, her neural interface processing hundreds of targeting solutions simultaneously. They're trying to force us into standard defensive positions. Execute primary attack plan, Aurelius commanded. The Nornite fleet burst into motion. Ships accelerated along paths that would have torn human crews apart, their superior neural processing allowing for maneuvers that bypassed the Bulk-Fa's prepared firing solutions completely. Squadron after squadron exploited gaps in the enemy formation that only became visible when viewed through multiple perspectives simultaneously. Their formation is trying to compensate. Caliph highlighted tactical data streaming through the neural network, but they can't maintain proper firing angles without breaking their own doctrine. Aurelius watched the Bulk-Fa cruiser attempt to track 3 simultaneous Nornite attack runs. Its guns swiveled frantically, following patterns designed for human speed engagement. While the Nornite ships moved at speeds his own crews could never have managed, the scene triggered a memory from the Centauri campaigns. I saw something like this before, Aurelius indicated the struggling cruiser. Third battle of Proxima. My fleet was superior in every way, but we lost half our ships because I wouldn't deviate from established doctrine. I learned then what the Bulk-Fa never did. That doctrine exists to serve reality, not define it. The Nornite ship struck from positions that redefined space combat itself. A squadron, under Vendra's command, had developed a spiraling attack pattern that utilized their species' ability to process multiple visual feeds simultaneously. Their ships wove through the Bulk-Fa formation in a complex dance that no human tactical computer could have coordinated. Squad 7 has abandoned the planned attack pattern entirely. Caliph highlighted another group's movements. Aurelius studied their improvisation with approval because they're not executing tactics anymore. They're creating them. Each squadron commander is applying the principles in their own way. Commander Rekshar is signaling again, Telera reported through the neural network. The Bulk-Fa's commander's image showed clear agitation, compound eyes shifting rapidly as his tactical computers failed to process the Nornite attack patterns. This is not proper combat doctrine. Your tactics are invalid. No, Aurelius replied, watching another squadron execute a maneuver that would have been impossible under human combat doctrine. They're simply beyond your understanding. A Nornite destroyer demonstrated this point by slipping through gaps in the Bulk-Fa's defensive screen, using its superior reaction time to execute a point-blank attack that their targeting systems couldn't track. Other commanders, seeing the success, began adapting and improving upon the technique in real time, their neural networks sharing tactical innovations faster than any human command structure could have managed. Final casualty reports coming in, Caliph reviewed the data streams flowing through his neural interface. We lost 12 ships. The Bulk-Fa lost 78, with another 43 disabled. And Commander Rekshar, Aurelius asked, studying the tactical display's aftermath analysis. His flagship is intact, but crippled. Vendra indicated a massive vessel near the edge of the battlefield, its weapon systems dark and propulsion fields fluctuating. He's requested to speak with you directly. The Bulk-Fa commander appeared on the main screen. His ceremonial armor showed damage, and several of his compound eyes had dimmed. The neural network's analysis indicated significant damage to his ship's command systems. You have violated every principle of established combat doctrine. Rekshar's translated voice carried tones of disbelief and something approaching revelation. Principles you never truly understood. Aurelius studied his defeated opponent through multiple sensor feeds. Your empire copied my tactics without grasping why they worked, including why they needed to be adapted for different species. Our implementation was perfect, Rekshar insisted, through combat sensors detected uncertainty in his physiological responses. Perfection without understanding is worthless. Aurelius gestured to the tactical display, neural interfaces updating to show the full scope of the battle's aftermath. Look at your fleet. Every ship followed human doctrine flawlessly, and every ship felt the forces fighting according to their own natural abilities. Vendra stepped forward, her neural interface synchronizing with the main tactical display. Your tactics assume limitations we don't have. while ignoring capabilities you could have developed. The Noranites aren't the only species your empire fights, Aurelius continued, watching over the Bokfa's commander's reactions through multiple sensor perspectives. How many other races have you forced into human-style combat, ignoring their unique strengths? How many battles have you won simply because your enemies made the same mistake? Silence. Stretched across the command deck as Rekshar processed this, his remaining eyes flickered in patterns that the neural network identified as internal conflict. The great Bokfa fleet, terror of a dozen systems, had been undone not by superior technology, but by simple self-awareness. Your empire stands at a crossroads, Aurelius spoke into that silence, neural interfaces translating his words into patterns the Bokfa commander could fully comprehend. You can retreat, cling the doctrine that doesn't serve you, and watch other species learn what the Noranites have learned. Or, you can begin to understand warfare, rather than simply executing it. First speaker Telera moved to Aurelius' side, her robes shifting through diplomatic patterns that the neural network translated for all species present. We are prepared to share what we've learned, Commander, not to fight against you, but to help all species discover their own path to victory. The Bokfa's commander's posture shifted subtly, combat sensors detecting changes in his neural patterns. You would teach us after we brought war to your worlds. The greatest victory, Aurelius quoted from his own writings, watching comprehension finally dawn in those alien eyes, is the one that transforms an enemy into a student. Hours later, Aurelius stood in the Academy's observation dome, watching Noranite ships escort the surviving Bokfa fleet towards neutral space. The neural networks had already begun adapting to incorporate Bokfa sensory patterns, preparing for the peace to come. Dr. Selmy joined him, carrying data crystals containing training protocols. The Bokfa High Command has accepted our terms, she reported, her neural interface processing diplomatic feeds. They're sending their first group of tactical students within the month. And our own graduates, already developing new strategies. Vendra's squadron created 3 novel attack patterns during the battle itself. They're teaching them to the next class of cadets. Aurelius nodded with satisfaction, watching the fleets disappear into faster-than-light transit. And my work here is done. You could stay, Selmy offered, the neural network detecting genuine hope in her voice patterns. Help us build something new. No. Aurelius turned to the window, his decision already made. I've taught you how to think beyond doctrine. What you build from that lesson should be your own. Then we'll return you to cryosleep, Telera spoke from the doorway, her robes flowing with patterns that spoke of respect and gratitude. Until the next time war calls for humanity's wisdom. Aurelius smiled, watching the activity in the academy grounds below, where Noranite cadets trained alongside newly arrived Bokfa students. I don't think you'll need it. The last lesson of human warfare isn't about tactics or strategy. It's about understanding that victory doesn't always look like what you expect. Through the neural interface, he could sense the academy buzzing with activity. Noranite instructors worked with Bokfa officers, each species beginning to discover strengths they never knew they had. In training halls and simulation chambers, new forms of combat doctrine were already emerging. Not copied from ancient text, but grown from genuine understanding of each species' unique capabilities. The call to cryosleep approached once again, environmental systems beginning their careful shutdown sequence. But this time, Aurelius welcomed it with the knowledge that he hadn't just taught them how to fight. He had taught them how to think, and that lesson would echo through the stars long after he returned to his frozen dreams. The neural network recorded his final conscious thoughts, not of battles won or enemies defeated, but of students, learning to see beyond the limitations others had placed upon them. In that moment, he understood that humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy wasn't in teaching others how to wage war, but in showing them how to transcend it. As the cryogenic systems activated, Aurelius saw not the end of his mission or his life, but the beginning of something far greater. The future would not belong to those who held to tradition, but to those who dared to create new ones. And in that truth lay humanity's final and perhaps most important, lesson to the stars.